Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this really interesting knife right here. This is the Demko Knives AD-15. First off, though, I want to thank very much my buddy Chris, who actually loaned this knife to me. He's got a couple of them, and he said, you know, Nick, you got to check out an AD-15. And in fact, it had been on my mind ever since I did the Formax review. So I'm really thrilled I got a chance to check one of these guys out. So thank you for that, Chris. Next thing, let's do a size comparison right here. Here it is against the Ontario Rat #1, which is about actually in the same size range. This guy's got a little bit more usable blade than the Rat 1. Here it is against the Spyderco Rat 2. Wow, the Ontario Rat #2. Here it is against the Spyderco Delica. That's what I meant to say here. As you can see here, this is dwarfing the Delica. And here it is against the Spyderco Shaman, which is another very interesting, harder use sort of knife. And you can see in terms of overall blade length, they're relatively similar, although this guy has more effective blade length due to the sharpening choil. So there you go. That's the size comparison. Next thing. Maker of this guy. This is a Demko Knives knife. Right here, Demko Knives. Who the heck is Demko? Andrew Demko. Well, Andrew Demko is a custom knife maker, but he also happens to be one of the driving design forces behind Cold Steel knives these days. He is the guy who designed the Triad lock for Cold Steel. He's designed a couple of their other pieces, the American Lawman, the Formax, a couple of others, I think the AK-47. Anyways, he's done a bunch of stuff for Cold Steel. That's probably where you know him from. But this is one of his knives that's released under his own brand in no affiliation with Cold Steel. And then finally, a quick note. What is this knife? Custom, production, mid-deck? I don't freaking know. This is kind of in that weird space in between, where it's a lot of money. It's $675. Let's introduce that elephant in the room here. But at the same time, you know, I don't even know what this is. This is a machine ground version, which is their name for it. But yeah, that's a little bit on the larger side, price-wise. But whatever it is what it is. So let's go ahead and talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting knife right here. So on the good side, first off, the ergonomics on this guy work really well for me. I have smaller hands than most, but this still works. It's got a nice finger choil, so I can go all the way choked up here for finer control. I can come back here, and it still works well, with the clip actually laying pretty low, which works nicely. It's got the very nice jimping going on here, especially for those kinds of cuts here. And because of all these various finger grooves, as well as this grippy G10 texture, this is not going anywhere in the hand, whether you're in, you know, water or air or fire or earth or any of the other spirit, any of the elements, this is not going to come flying out of your hand. Water or air, what the heck? Okay, next thing, this has a very nice clip to it. It's got a titanium clip, it's a spoon clip style thing, it's got a lot of spring to it, and it's positioned well. It hangs the knife at a nice angle here. You can see it gives it a slight cant overall in the pocket. This is just a very nice clip, and it actually pockets much better than you would expect given its size. Next thing, this is a totally ambidextrous knife. You can see here that the clip flips over, and then the rest of the knife is completely, it's studs on both sides. You've got the lock access on both sides. This is just as good to a lefty as to a righty. Holy crap, I'm closing it with my left hand. See, usually I just don't have that kind of left hand skill, but today I'm rocking it, so that's good. But the fact this is completely lefty friendly is a beautiful thing. Next thing, this is a relatively space efficient knife. If we compare this guy to the Spyderco Shaman here, we can see that the Shaman is only marginally smaller in some dimensions or another, but this guy is packing in more usable blade than the Shaman is. That's actually quite good. And a big part of that, and similarly here, the handle size, although, again, it's a tall blade, the handle itself is actually around the same size as this guy, but again, with more usable blade. So I'm pretty impressed with the space efficiency of this guy. This is not a knife, although it's certainly big in the pocket, you're getting a lot of knife for that bigness, and that's great. And that's partly a consequence, by the way, of this Scorpion lock here, which allows the lock to be around the same place. It's just well done. So that's good. Next thing, this guy has very nice thumb studs. You can see here they've got themselves a little bit of a pyramidal, ziggurattle sort of approach here. And it's a little bit more pyramidy on the side with the screw here. But you know what? They work great. They give you enough purchase. There's no freaking problem. At least for my hands, they're actually a little bit further back than I'd like them to be. I'd kind of like the stud to be over here for me. But then again, I have smaller fingers. And so for me, it's kind of, I can't necessarily trace with my thumb the entire path. I can, but I have to be at a weird angle here. But nevertheless, I think these are really nice thumb studs. They're well shaped, and they give you plenty of texture while not being too pokey or pointy. So that's good. Next thing, the blade on this guy is great. This particular blade is CTS XHP, but most of these are being made in S35VN these days. And that's very nice. And it's a no-nonsense blade shape. It's got a nice tall grind here. It's got a relatively... The tip is a little bit more reinforced, so it's a little thicker than it is down here, but it is actually quite thin behind the edge. And that brings me to my next point here, is that this is absolutely a hard-use sort of blade. That's what it's designed to do, but it still absolutely cuts very, very well. It's really well ground. And in fact, this guy is very, very able to cut things. If I use... I mean, take a look at this. This is cutting paper very, very effectively. This is like 3 sheets of paper, by the way. And it's been a little while since I stropped this guy up. So still, this really does cut. This is a great cutting tool. And although certainly this is some pretty thick blade stock, this is not a knife that I felt like, you know, sometimes when you're carrying something crazy overbuilt, it's like, oh, God, I have to cut something right now. I'm not carrying the right knife. But this really does feel like the right knife for cutting jobs. And so that's great. And the blade on the whole is great. Swedge and everything. Next thing, I gotta say the finishing on this guy is pretty solid too. It is relatively smooth. In terms of it's got a little bit of the stick slippy stuff to it, but you know what? It's relatively smooth. The blade actually has 2 contrasting finishes. You've got a bit of a stone wash over here, then you've got the machine grind portions. That gives it a little bit of a mystery. The mystery. Oh God. What am I doing? 5 elements and then mystery? Whatever it is, it looks pretty good. On the pivot here, you've got the nice little labelation going on there. The overall, the fasteners all look pretty good. I gotta say, and frankly, even the G10, this pattern of G10 is quite cool. You've got a little bit of like a radial milling thing going on. It's different. It's unique. I've not seen that G10 pattern elsewhere. So all of this, on the whole, is quite good. Most of the hardware is Torx. It's solid. And so the finishing on this guy is quite good. I don't know if it's made in shop by the Demkos, you know, if it's done out, but whoever's making it, they're doing a good job. And so that's great. Next thing that I like a lot about this guy is the lock on this. This is using the Demko Knives Scorpion lock. And basically the way that it works is it's got this little bar here, and this little bar has a little bar in it, and that bar falls into this little hole in the blade, and then that prevents the knife from locking up. That prevents the knife from coming shut when that's in there. And so on the outside here, there's a little bit of a ramp for it, but it never locks back shut again, but it just slides along and then falls into place. It's a very simple kind of thing. It's a variant of like a backstrap locky sort of an affair. But it's actually sprung here. It's got an articulating arm. You can see here the arm is moving inside the... But it's a really, really nice lock. And because it is completely and totally solid. And it's secure with or without the hand there. Some people see this and they think, oh, well, if you don't have your hand on there, it's unsafe. No. My hand is providing no support here, but I am whacking the crap out of this blade, and it's not going freaking anywhere. And with your hand on there, it's even more secure because your hand, as you grip this knife, is actually pushing this bar further down into there. So it's really not going anywhere. And so that's really nice. It also has a very nice detent. I was a little afraid with this guy being spring-driven that it was going to be, poor in that regard, but it's actually quite good. With a little tiny bit of wrist, which is a good idea when anytime you've got a blade this big, it's very, very easy to pop this guy open. And I like that very much. And it's also very easy to close one-handed because all you need to do is use like your thumb, at least for me, or you can use 2 fingers and kind of pinch, but you just need to pop this the first bit of the way out of there. And then you can just use your finger to slide it the rest of the way home. And so this is very, very easy. After I carried it for, an hour, I just had it completely muscle memoried. I can get this guy open and closed with one hand, no freaking problem. And so I think this is a really good lock here. It's solid, it's interesting, it's different, and absolutely works like a charm. And so to me, at least, all that is the good here is that the Scorpion lock on this works really, really well. It's nicely finished. It's got a great blade shape that still is ground to cut, thank God. It has nice thumb studs. It is space efficient. It is totally ambidextrous with an excellent clip. Solid thumb studs, I think I said already, and the ergonomics on it are absolutely good to go. To me, what's great about this knife, though, is the uniqueness of it. There's really nothing else that's kind of out there like this. It's got a weird lock to it. It's got a weird idea to it. Frankly, the idea of this kind of a hard-use knife that is still a really excellent cutting tool, oh my God, does the knife industry need to learn from this, but still, it's cool. It's, on the whole, this knife is really unique. It's an odd little freaking duck. If I look out at the knife world and I look around, I don't see anything else out there that's exactly like this. Yeah, there are some analogous pieces, like the Buck Marksman, the Chris Reeve tie lock, those kinds of things. But this is its own little thing, doing its own big thing, I suppose, doing its own little thing out there in the knife world. And I appreciate the fact that it is both unique and very, very well done. And to me, that's what's great, is that this is completely weird, yet very compelling. On the bad side, first off, this is a big one. Absolutely 100%. Blade is 3.75 inches. I'd measure had I not packed up my calipers already. But still, take my word, it's a freaking big knife. Next thing, there is no steel marking on this guy. The guy who sent it to me is, sold it to me, actually, spoiler alert, it tells me this is CTS XHP, but I have no way of proving that, short of, using it and seeing how it, handles and things like that. But I really wish that they would do more steel marking, and more specifically because, actually, they've made these in a number of steels. Seen the S35VN is what they're doing these days. 20CV seems to have happened as well. They need to mark that thing down. Next thing, unfortunately, you can see here, there's just a little tiny bit of smile down here. They just barely missed the sharpening choil down here. Taking that just a little bit further. Not a big deal, but it's a deal. Next thing, it is very easy, as you're carrying this guy, for crud to get trapped in this groove here in your pocket. It's mostly up against the side of your pocket, so that makes it okay. And it's very easy just to blow out or even scrape out of there if something does get in there. But that is actually potentially hazardous, because if you get something stuck in there, you can, it'll fail to fully lock, but again, you'll feel that it's going to be weird, so, is what it is. Next thing, the clip on this guy is on some particularly grippy G10. It's not so bad. I've definitely had knives that are worse, but it's definitely something that you feel. I kind of wish they'd maybe smooth the G10 under the clip there a little bit, but they'd had to do it on both sides. It's not so bad, but it's a thing. Next thing, thumb stud, absolutely in the slicing path here. Which means that if you're doing really deep cuts, particularly in this kind of a direction, whatever you're cutting is going to be binding up on those thumb studs. Again, this is part of the reason I wish the thumb studs were a little bit further back. That's mostly for my ergonomics, but it would help in that domain as well. Next thing, this guy has a fair bit of internal complexity. Locked up inside here is a coil spring. It's got a structural lanyard hole. It's got a bunch of, watch this assembly. You'll see exactly how this guy's put together. It's not bad, but there's some stuff going on in there, and it's a little bit less simple than, for instance, a back lock, a triad lock, something like that. And so, that's something to keep in mind. Next thing, this guy does not have a secondary lock. What I mean by that is that a number of the AD-15s have a secondary lock back here, a second thing that basically blocks off, and if you look at the disassembly video, you'll see the area where that bar slides in, and that actually prevents this lock from coming unlocked, period. Like, in no way with that secondary, there is no way, even using it, even trying to lift it, that it's ever coming loose. But that doesn't happen here. This version does not have that secondary lock. It has all the hardware underneath, the handle is milled for it, but they just didn't put one in. And I'm sorry, but no. This is a $675 knife. You guys are not allowed to cut corners on this kind of thing. At that price point, put in the damn secondary lock. Well, when I talked to him, well, that's a feature of the customs. We can do it by request, but that's part of the custom package. Like, no, it's $675. Put in the freaking secondary lock. I'm sorry, guys, but no, you're not allowed to pinch pennies here. And speaking of pinching pennies, this is using Teflon washes. Now, look, I don't know if that's for pinching pennies or for some other reason I don't understand. But look, no, I'm sorry. This guy is using Teflon washes, and that seems so weird to me on a hard-use sort of tool. I have a whole knife gripe about this, and I know that there's a part of this that is just my personal bias. I do not buy expensive chunks of steel to have somebody put plastic in the middle of them that'll shred and just embed crap, and it'll feel worse over time rather than better. But, guys, I'm sorry. People and my biggest issue with them, and this is a rant I've made over and over again, but the best thing that people say for Teflon washes is, well, they can be just as good as phosphor bronze, but you know what else can be? Phosphor bronze! I don't know. No one has ever given me any compelling argument why they're preferable. But that said, the reason this is bad rather than ugly, even though personally, if I were not trying to consciously correct for my bias, this would be ugly, but is that the action is fine despite the Teflon. You don't need it to be super fast. It's smooth enough. The stick slippiness is kind of lost in the inertia of this gigantic freaking blade, and it's never going to be a super smooth free dropper with the Scorpion lock system as it is. But guys, come on, it's $675. Why are we cutting corners with a plastic freaking washer? So I really hope that they address that in the future, because that just seems so out of character for this knife. I opened that, I was just like, what are you? No. And so there you go. And then finally on the bad side, this is a lot of freaking money. Look, $675 $675 is an absurd price for a pocket knife. I admit this freely. I've paid more for pocket knives, but holy crap, is that nuts? Even if it is made in the USA, even if it is a low-volume knife, but the thing is, I'm sorry, that's a lot of money. You really have to love this knife to consider paying even anywhere near that amount of money, and particularly when they're not doing every damn thing possible at that kind of a price point. When there's no lock here, when there's Teflon washers, that really gets a little bit harder to swallow. And so to me, that's the bad here, is that $675 is a lot of money. It is Teflon washers, which, come on, guys, there's no secondary lock, even though it's milled for one. Again, come on, guys. There is a bunch of internal complexity to this guy. The thumb stud is in the slicing path. The clip is on some particularly grippy G10. It's possible for pocket crud to get trapped in the lockup. This just barely missed the sharpening choil. There is no steel marking, and this is absolutely a big freaking knife. The ugly thing to me, like I said, the Teflon is ugly as sin, but I think that's more ideological than anything, and there's nothing else really that's ugly here about this guy. So let's go into the final conclusion. And my final conclusion on this knife, and I carried this guy a lot. Like, I took my dear sweet freaking time with this. I'm a guy who, generally speaking, for a review, I'll carry something for 2 or 3 days. Generally, I'll try and use it, sometimes more, sometimes less. This guy has probably gotten more pocket time than 99% of items I brought across my table for review. And there is one reason for that, and that is I love this knife. And my question is, why the hell do I love this knife? This is not a Nick knife in any conceivable universe. It is huge, it is overbuilt, it is black, it is using Teflon washers, it is expensive. It is about as far from the pocket jewelry that I usually love as possible. And so by all estimations, this knife should be, maybe if you're Rambo or Kevin Cleary or something, okay. But for most people, no. But the thing is, no, I love this knife. This is a gem, and I don't know why. I mean, flat freaking out. It's incredible. And actually, I do know why, because it's well made. It is really great in the hand, ergonomically speaking. It has a great blade that actually is good for cutting things. And that's kind of unique as well. But the knife itself is incredibly unique. There's really nothing else out there that's exactly like this guy, or frankly, that's even near it. It is rare, and moreover, it is really rare for something that's really unusual and out of left field to also be really well done and really compelling, but this is absolutely that. And so I like this knife a lot, and it took me a long time, but before I'm willing to call this a gem, it was like, really? Nick, really? Really? What am I missing here? But no, it's great. Now, look, I do know, though, that the price, there are going to be a bunch of people shouting at the, "You bourgeois bastard, it's $675. I know that's going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people. And so if you're thinking about, well, I couldn't do this, but I like the idea of it, there are some other things to consider. Demko has some other designs for cold steel, like the American Lawman. I actually haven't gotten a chance to handle one of those, but I'm gonna, absolutely. The Spyderco Shaman is a nice alternative for this guy. I think it's, bear with me here, it's a very, very different knife, but it has a lot of similarities in a lot of good ways. And it's another hard-use beatery knife that can still cut. And if you're still looking for something that's completely absurd, and by Andrew Demko, consider the Cold Steel 4MAX. Speaking of things I never thought I'd be saying. But it's a bigger knife. The 4MAX is 4 inches rather than 3.75 here. It's 9 full ounces rather than this guy. Oh, by the way, it's heavy. Did I forget to mention that? Yeah, it's freaking heavy. It comes in around 6 ounces here. But, that one comes in at 9, so it's even heavier than this guy. It's even more gigantic. The 4MAX is absolutely absurd. But you know what? It still has that great grind, and it's still weirdly compelling as a tool. Even if I don't like the triad lock as much, which is part of the reason I decided against that guy, that's about half the price at $350. And so that's another thing to consider here. And the thing is, even with that price in mind, this is a great knife. If you're after this guy, just pay the price. I really do recommend it. And in fact, when I say just pay the price, I say that because I did pay the price. I got this guy and I carried it, and I kind of started falling in love. It's like, wait a second, this is a great knife. Wait a second, I don't want to mail this home. Hold on. And so I contacted my buddy Chris, who I think had gently hinted that he might be open to selling. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, sell me an AD-15. Sure thing. It's a Demko. And then here I am like, so, hey, how about that AD-15? Well, what's your price there? And so I made him an offer, and he sold it to me. And so this is now a part of my actual collection, which again is not something I thought I'd be saying. But nonetheless, I think you can pay that price, and I don't think you're getting ripped off there. So because it's just so damn weird and unique. So anyways, there you go. It's a big knife. It is crazy. It is not for everybody, but weirdly enough, I think it is for me. Or at least it's something I bought, and I think it may well be for you as well. So I hope this is interesting, and that this knife enjoyed its 15 minutes of fame, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.